I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. You guys always like to see a demo. So I'm going to show you how the floor scraper works, especially after I did all that work getting it cleaned up, sharpened, and blow on the handle. This carpeting has a rubber back on it, and it works okay considering it goes on concrete floor. And going over the title, they glued it down. I don't know if it was actually intended to be glued down or if that just happened because the rubber deteriorated and it stuck. Because I can't see gluing this kind of carpet down. Especially since this over here is not really stuck in most of the places. I think it's just it's a situation where the rubber backing kind of glued itself down. Be that as it may, the floor scraper does a fine job getting it up. And the spots where it's a little easier, not quite so stuck down. You can take a full width cut. But here, where it's stuck down really solid, I went after it with about a half a blade, about right. The floor scraper does a great job of getting the gunk up off the floor, and I'm going to hopefully finish this job here in this coming weekend. But getting the old scraper out and using it reminded me of a lot of the things that I did when I was younger. Back in 1990, when we moved to our house in Union City, it was a big old place. We really didn't intend to buy a house that day. I was going along, well, at least I wasn't intending to buy a house that day. I was going along with Lydia on another expedition. She'd fallen in love with a big old house over in Coldwater. And it was a wreck. It was an absolute wreck. Huge, 12-foot wide grand staircase going up the center of the house. It was gorgeous. I mean, it was just huge. And it had been let go. They had apartments in the upstairs, and it was badly in need of a whole lot of work. Now it's a bed and breakfast, and we actually stayed there one night. Very nice place, and the people running it doing a great job. I would never want to take on that kind of a task. For one thing, just restoring the house probably set them back $500,000. That's not anywhere near my budget. And trying to recoup $500,000 on a bed and breakfast, especially in a little town of Coldwater, that's ambitious. But anyways, she'd fallen in love with that house. And from then on, even though we lived in a very nice tri-level house out in the country in a suburb, beautiful place, she really wanted to have a Victorian house. So we traipsed around because she has a lot of friends in the real estate business. Having worked as an office manager in a real estate office for many years, she had a lot of contacts. So we heard about every Victorian house in the world. And most of them that were within driving distance, we went to see. I saw a lot of great houses. I saw a lot of dumps. I saw a lot of houses in general. So when we went over to Union City to see this house out in the country, I didn't have much hopes. We looked at one house around the corner from there, and the guy who had worked on the house was a handyman. Not a classic handyman. He was more of a adventurer in remodeling. He'd taken the attached two-car garage on the back of it and turned it into living space. Not an uncommon thing to do. People do it all the time. Having a sheet metal, barn siding sheet metal roof ceiling in the living room was a bit strange. And, we were looking at the house and the people were there, so I really didn't want to comment too negatively about it. It's the house that they worked on and they put a lot of time in. I wouldn't like it if somebody complained about my house when they were in here and I was here. But be that as it may, we were looking at the house and we ended up going upstairs. And we went up this little narrow stairway and I had to duck my head because otherwise I'd hit my head on the ceiling. Walked down the hallway, crouched down. There in the middle of the floor sat a toilet. And I thought, well, that's an odd place to put it, but maybe they're working on the house. No, that was a working toilet. That was the space that was above the bathroom downstairs. So the vent pipe went through the wall and they attached to the vent pipe and down to the toilet downstairs, and that's how they plumbed it. So when we went to look at a house near there, I really didn't have much hope for it. Well, Lydia had driven by the house. She'd actually looked at the house across the street, which was a big old Victorian house, giant brick place. We called them BOBPs because we saw so many big old brick places. And while she was over there, she saw that the sign in front of that house had a sold sign on it. But across the street, as she was turning around the driveway of the BOBP, John Dunks was out in front putting a for sale sign in the front yard. She whipped into the driveway and looked around and saw something she liked. Well, that happened quite often. She came home and said, "Dave, would you go with me to see a house?" Always up for it. So we got in the car and drove over to Union City. Now we lived in Quincy, which is our house was about 8 miles from Coldwater, and Coldwater is about 18 miles from Union City. So it was about 27 miles, 28 miles over there. And during that time, just like a half hour, 45 minutes by the time you make it all the way over there, we just talked about general stuff, Well, we were going to meet John Dunks over at the house, which is unusual because normally we were talking to a real estate person. But John was selling the house himself. He just put up a sign that said, "House for sale." So, drove in the driveway and John was there. We met and walked around the place. I liked John right off. John was a kind of a down-to-earth guy. He was a farmer. He owned the farm next door. That's why he got the house. He bought it for the land. It was sitting on 70 acres, half of it cornfield, roughly half of it was cornfield, and the rest was hayfield. And he had farmed the cornfield and baled the hay off that hayfield for, 20 years since he got out of college. So it was kind of a normal thing for when the people who owned the house decided that they wanted to leave. John was given first bids on the farm. So he bought the house and the farm. Decided he didn't need the house, but he wanted to sell the house to somebody who would take care of it. He'd known the people that lived there as long as he'd lived there. And John Dunks lived on Dunks Road. Kind of gives you an idea. Dunks Road was started in 1836. That was the main road between Union City and Sherwood. The big maple trees in front of our house had been planted in 1836 because in the Sherwood Prairie, which is where the center of our house sat in the center of the Sherwood Prairie, the grass was so tall that the people on their wagons couldn't see where they were going. They could, even standing up on the seat, they couldn't see far enough to see where they were going. So they planted the trees to delineate the pathway between Union City and Sherwood, 1836. Right about the time Michigan became a state. So, our house, get ahead of myself there. John showed us around the house, and I looked at it, and normally as I walked through a house, I found everything wrong with it. You know, the cabinets were in bad shape, the floors were crooked. Big thing I looked for was bones. I looked at the ridge line to see if the ridge line sagged. I looked at the floors to see if the floors were wrinkled or buckled. I checked the basement to see if the foundation was secure. And as I walked through the house, I wasn't finding anything wrong. Well, there were little things. I mean, the house was built in 1891. Yeah. We went to look at it in 1890. So it was 99 years old. Did I say 1890? We went to look at it in 1990. The house was built in 1891. It was 99 years old. The Glessmans, who owned the house prior to us, prior to John, had moved in 1950 when her parents died. Her parents had owned the house. Roy Barton Klein, his name was written in the barn. Back in 1891, Roy Barton Klein moved into the house, which was the, it's not really, wasn't sharecropping. It was like he was a farmer that worked for the guy who owned the BOBP across the street. The guy who owned the BOBP built the house and died. So the house went up, that house went up for sale. The little house across the street, which our house was the little house across the street. It was a 2-story farmhouse with, 10, 12 rooms. Pretty good size. But it was the sub farm to the big farmhouse. Kind of gives you an idea where we're going with this thing. Anyways, I walked through the house, and as I said, it was 99 years old. When the Glessons moved in 1951, the year I was born, they went through and remodeled the house and put in a new kitchen, a new bathroom, had an Italian tile expert come in. He had gone through a bunch of houses in the area. I guess he was an itinerant tile layer, and he tiled the entire bathroom. It was beautiful. Beautiful job. Tile floor, tile walls, tile shower, tile everything. And not the cheap plastic kind either. This was the heavy-duty ceramic tile that and marble floor, marble tile floor. Really cool. So as I'm walking through the house, I'm finding things that it needed. But I was thinking of how I would fix them. Not looking at the house saying, oh, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, in an attempt to dissuade someone from buying the house. This time I was looking at the house saying, yeah, I could do this. We went outside and looked at the barns after looking at the house. I hadn't found anything wrong with the house, nothing, no deal breakers. I walked into the barn. Barn was huge, 60 feet square. And of course, it had haylofts. It was built in the shape of a C. The main floor, it was in the front, had 2 sets of doors on it. One small set of doors that went to the carriage barn, and then the large doors that went into the main part of the hay operating area, where they brought the hay wagons in and offloaded the hay into the mouths. Had the big hay rail across the top of the building, and it also had the hay rake and the hay lift still in. Nope, didn't have a hay rake. Had the hay lift still in the center of the building. I put the hay rake in later. The hay grabber, the device used to pick up hay with the hay lift, I put that in later because I thought it needed it. Anyways, walked in there and I thought, wow, perfect. It was huge. The front room was like 40 by 25. Just a monster building. And then you had two wings off the back. On the left-hand side was the dairy barn, where I used the scraper, kind of tying that into the story. The dairy barn was back there, and then on the other side was the granary and the carriage barn where they kept the carriage horses. Well, plow horses, I would imagine, in the beginning. And then back in the back was the sheep barn. So we walked through it, and of course it was dirty and dusty, and there was hay all over the place, and I thought it was great. At the time, I had a 22-foot sailboat, and I had stored it in the side yard with a tarp over it. And I thought, wow, I could actually raise the mast in here, because the ceiling was that high. It was 35 feet to the center. Yeah, when I did the tackle on the hay lift, that was interesting. 35 feet straight up. Anyways, so we wandered through that and looked at that, and I thought, wow, this is great. This is great. I'm not saying anything, though, because, you don't want to give away too much. You're going to have to talk a deal. So we walked around. The property was 2.5 acres, which the house we were living in Quincy was about 2.5 acres. And it was divided up with 101 little fences and had little barns and little sheds and little piles of stuff all over it, and it really been neglected. But the Glessmans didn't farm. Mr. Glessman was kind of he was a sneelock. He liked fixing things. He was a fire inspector and a fire engineer. So he was very careful about things. We had a complete set of drawings for the building, the house, and it showed where the well was and where the power line came in and where the drain was and the septic tank and all the other things that an engineer would do. So I kind of felt right at home with that. And then we walked out back, and here was this little kind of tumble down building in the back. And John said that was the hog barn. So I tried to look inside. There was windows, but they were so dirty you couldn't see into the windows. We did manage to get a door open, but you couldn't set foot inside because it was packed full of stuff. And I thought, okay, not much to that. But maybe I could fix it. Again, not saying anything. Now Lydia knows me because we'd been married I was 40, we got married when I was 25, so we'd been married for 15 years at the time. She knew me pretty well. So we get all done, we're walking out towards the cars, and I said, how much you want for it? John said 60. I shook his hand and said, thanks, I'll take it. Bought a house just like that. Didn't have our other house listed yet. Hadn't done any thinking on it other than, boy, I want this house. We spent the next 20 years living there. Ryan grew up. We rebuilt everything that needed to be rebuilt. I rewired the house, replumbed the house, put in another bathroom. We ended up hiring a contractor to do the downstairs bathroom because I was getting older, and turns out that I had a heart condition, so I wasn't quite up to doing all the work at the time. Since then, 2 surgeries later, heart's fine, I'm okay. But at the time, it was a lot more work than I was up to. But anyways, house was beautiful. Loved the house, but it was huge. Really big. A lot to take care of. And we thought, okay, maybe it's not a good idea to stay here forever. We should sell the house while we can. Well, we hit the market just at the right time. Our house was going up, and this house had gone down. Once again, the people had decided that the people who lived here, actually the lady who lived here, had passed on, and her children didn't want the house, and it had sat empty for 2 years, and it needed some work. Sounds like another thing, right? Yep. We bought a house because it was in the right location at the right time. So now I'm going through and fixing this house, and the scraper's doing the same job it did at the house in Union City. Cleaning up messes, making things better. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.